Hi, I'm Gene Armstrong, and today we're going to discuss the harvesting of honey from your beehives. You've worked all year, taking care of your bees. Now it's time to reap the sweet reward. Let's start with some basics. Why do bees make wax comb, and how is it used? How do they collect the nectar? How do they store the nectar? How do they convert the nectar into honey? And what do they do when the honey is finished and ready for storage? Relatively young bees exude wax between the platelets in their abdomen. The bees take this wax and create cells called comb that are hexagonal in shape and angled upward at an angle of about 10 degrees from the horizontal. The foraging bees will then go out and collect nectar from the flowers. Nectar is effectively a very dilute solution of sugar or sugar water. These are then taken back to the hive. This very watery sugar solution is then taken back to the hive where it is stored in the wax comb. The nectar brought back to the hive is not suitable for long-term storage, for use by the bees as food, and is certainly not honey. The nectar contains somewhere around 80% moisture and must be reduced to around 17% in order to become honey. Further, a chemical reaction must occur for this nectar to become honey. Nectar contains sucrose, which is the same sugar that you find in your table sugar. It must be converted to a 50% combination of fructose and dextrose sugars to become honey. Now, in order to do this, bees have an enzyme in their saliva. An enzyme is a material that promotes a chemical reaction, in this case, the breaking down of the sucrose into fructose and dextrose. This enzyme in the bee's saliva is called invertase and helps to promote the chemical reaction. When the moisture level gets down to 17%, and the sucrose is largely completely broken down, then you have honey. Now, once this reaction is complete, the bees will take additional wax and will cap over the top of the cells. This honey will be able to be kept for a long time periods, and the bees can use it to eat on at future times and will provide them food during the winter. Okay, how can you help the bees with making honey? They have to have comb to put the nectar in. You can assist the bees in that by feeding them sugar water early in the spring to assist in the production of wax. The bees have to eat about 4 pounds of honey or sugar syrup in order to make 1 pound of wax. The other thing is that you really need to try to save the comb made in previous years by the bees to use and help them get started. So if you have comb left over from the previous year on frames, you put that in there and the bees don't have to make the comb, they can start filling it with nectar. All right, so much for the background. Now, how do we get our honey? A lot of questions to be considered and steps involved. First, when do you harvest? How do you get the bees out of the honey supers? How do you do the uncapping of the wax covering over the cells? What about getting the honey out of the frames? How do you get all the debris and extraneous material out of the honey? What's involved with the bottling? How do you clean up all that huge mess of the partially empty frames? And what do you do with the wax that's left over? Well, you can tell it's time to harvest when the bees stop making honey. Most people harvest in middle to late July when the hives are starting to look like the one in this photo. All right, when do you harvest? Well, for one thing, the bees know when the honey is ready. If the comb is capped with wax, then you can be pretty sure that the honey is ready for harvest, is low enough in moisture level, will not spoil or go bad. The other thing that some of the old timers will do is they will take the frames, even if it's not capped, and will turn it sideways and will shake the frames. And if the honey stays in the cells, then it's ready to harvest. If the honey comes spewing out of the cells, then it's not. The technical way to do things would be to take things like a refractometer. These are relatively inexpensive things that you can make. You can test the moisture level of your honey with the refractometer, and if it's 18% to moisture or below, you can feel reasonably confident that you can harvest the honey. Next question is, what about all those pesky bees all up in the honey supers? How do you get them out? Well, there are four basic ways to do that. One is what's called a fume board, which is put on top of the honey super. It contains felt that is put face down, and there are materials that you can spray on the felt that the bees find obnoxious, and they will leave the honey supers and will go down lower in the hive. Second thing that you can do is you can use a conventional leaf blower. Pull the frames out one frame at a time, blow the bees off. Sometimes that tends to kind of agitate the bees, but it is effective in getting the bees out of the honey supers. If you want to start the day before, you can use what is called an escape board, which is like a matrix that in the evening when the bees go back down and huddle in the brood production area and leave the honey supers during the night, they will have to go through this escape board. They can go through it and can go down, but they have great difficulty coming up. The old-time way to do things is just to take a simple light bee brush and brush the bees off of each frame, one frame at a time. Once you've done this, of course, you need to keep the bee-free frames away from the hive and in a container so that the bees don't redeposit on the frame. Here are some examples of getting the bees out of the honey supers. The photograph on the left shows the fume boards on top of the honey supers trying to drive the bees down lower into the hive. The other photographs show methods such as the bee brush and shaking the bees off to get them out of the individual honey frames. Uncapping is a little bit of a problem. The bees have put wax over the top of each cells, just like Grandma used to do with the ball jars and paraffin and the strawberry preserves. You can't get the honey out of the frames without removing these caps. There's several ways to do it. One is with a pick type of scraper that you see in the upper left. The other is with a hot knife like you see in the lower left, and the bigger producers actually have mechanical machines that they feed the frames into that act like a planer and skim the wax off of the top of the cells. Whatever you want to do, whatever works and is easiest for you, that's good. You should, if you're mechanically doing this yourself, do it over a tub of some sort so you can collect this wax for future use, and you can also drain some honey out of the wax that's scraped off. There are two basic methods for extracting the frames that have been uncapped. One is a centrifuge that spins the frames around and around, driving the honey out of the frames to the outside of the extractor, and then it drains down and is siphoned off the bottom. If you just have a little bit of honey to do, you can use an old-fashioned kitchen colander. Just cut all the wax out, put it into the colander, and let it drain down. As I mentioned, there are two kinds of extractors. The larger ones are called radial, as you see on the left, that the top of the frames go toward the outside of the extractor. The bottoms of the frame point to the center of the extractor. This is good because the upward angle of the cells, you can actually extract the honey from both sides of the frame at the same time. For smaller operators, you can get a tangential one. Here, the frames are actually parallel to the sides of the extractor, and you must extract one side of the frame and then turn it over and extract the other side. Twice as time consuming, but this kind of extractor is a lot cheaper. All right. One thing to keep in mind is that honey viscosity varies greatly depending on temperature. You can extract much, much easier if the honey and the frames are warm. Very, very difficult to extract at regular room temperature. So if possible, you want to be in a warm environment, or you want the frames to be warm so the honey is warm, and so it comes out and flows easily. Many beekeepers call this working in a hothouse, so the warmer the better. Once the honey is extracted, you're still going to have a lot of bee parts, pieces of wax, and other debris in there, and you must filter that out. This can be done in several different ways. One is with built-in filters that some of the commercial bee suppliers sell that fit right over the top of 5-gallon buckets, or you can also use cheesecloth. Once the honey is filtered, you can put it in a bottle of your size and choice with your label on it. This shows filtered honey being bottled. Note my little dog there supervising the process. Be prepared to bottle 50 to 100 pounds of honey per hive. These are examples of 1-pound jars at the beginning of the honey bottling process. You'll probably need some help. It's a long and arduous process from getting the honey out of the hives to getting it into the jars. So if you want to bring over some friends and make a party out of it, convert it into a barbecue, or maybe even provide some beer for your helpers, that helps out a lot. Everybody seems to have a great time if you have a honey harvesting project. All right, you've got all kinds of messy extracted frames left over. What in the world do you do? Well, you don't need to wash these things. You don't need to scrub them. You don't need to clean them up. Just let the bees take care of everything. If you put the extracted frames outside for a day, the bees from the hive will come and will clean them whistle clean in 24 hours. At that point, the comb is dry, free of honey, and ready for storage. All right, the honey-free frames are ready for storage, but you still have the potential for larvae from varroa mites and wax moths and other kinds of pests to be in there, and you don't want your frames to become ruined during the winter storage. One possibility is to take these frames and put them in a freezer for about 2 to 3 days and then bring them out in storage, and hopefully that should kill any kind of critters that might be lurking inside the comb. The other thing is that you can buy a material called paramoth that you can put in small quantities in between the honey supers of comb, and that will drive off and keep away the moths. Some beekeepers actually opt for open air storage, believing that the wax moths will not get into the comb if it's stored in sunlight and open air. In any event, you need to put a top on the boxes being stored and a bottom on the boxes being stored, so various kinds of vermin cannot get into the boxes. All right, you've bottled your honey. You've stored away your wax comb for use next spring, but you've got all these messy wax cappings from the uncapping operation mixed in with honey. You want to try to save some of this very, very valuable wax. So there's a couple steps that you can use that are fairly straightforward. Some people use solar wax melters. The technique I use involves 3 basic steps. One is to put the wax cappings into buckets of water, swirl them around, try to remove and dissolve as much of the honey as possible. Second, take a large pot on the stove, put these wax cappings in the pot with several gallons of water. Gently heat this, and the wax will rise to the surface. Any debris or most of the debris and honey residue will become dissolved in the water, and when you turn it off and let it cool, you'll end up with what looks like a frisbee of wax on the top of the pot. Be very, very careful. Remember that wax is flammable, and heating it on the stove can be dangerous if you're not careful. The third thing I do is I take this hockey puck or frisbee of wax. I will dissolve it. I happen to use a very large old crock pot for this, and melt the wax. Then filter it into molds that are capped with window screen or some sort of filter material. What you'll end up with is very nice ingots of solid wax that can be used for a whole variety of purposes, from making candles to cosmetics to exchanging with people like Kelly's Beekeeping to get you new foundation and so forth. That's it. That's honey harvesting. Be happy. This is the time of year that all beekeepers look forward to. Good luck, and I hope you have a good harvest this year.